Alright, so welcome to my hair tutorial. Now in this video I will go through sculpting and constructing the hair. By the way, I just did a hair drawing tutorial and I do think that you should check it out as well, even if you don't know how to draw. There's some useful stuff in there as well. Anyway, just like the drawing video, for this video we'll first go through the theory of constructing hair, and yes, whether you draw or sculpt hair you need to watch this part. After that I will go through some quick sculpting tips, and last but not least we'll go through actually sculpting the hair step by step using curve brushes, custom IMM methods, and of course raw sculpting. And once again, first up, the boring part, theory. So whether you're looking to quickly add pre-made hair onto a model or generate real hair on a model using Blender or XGen, you still need to understand how and why the hair works to make it look convincing. Now, the first thing you need to understand about hair is that hair is a separate mass on the head or body. In other words, you can't just place some hair on the head and call it a day. It will look wrong. The hair, like clothing, echoes the forms underneath. Just applying this idea will improve your hair construction by quite a bit. Now this tip is a lot easier to understand in 3D because you can immediately see that the hair looks off if it lies just above the head. Right, the second thing to note is that hair is complex. Too complex to copy exactly. Beginners love doing this. It's a fool's errand, so just don't. What you need to do is simplify it. The mark of a great artist is not everything they are able to put in, but everything they are able to leave out. In this case, I'll work with the rules of threes. This means I'm dividing the hair into 3 parts, then working from there. In this example, we have the top layer of hair, the bottom layer of hair, and then the shaved part over here. These are 3 parts. There's also the 4th part, the stray hairs, but the first 3 parts make up the bulk of the hair, and they make the hair far more understandable. This is the mentality I use when I go into any hair drawing, or especially when I'm sculpting. Alright, and just a quick side note here, check out these Bernini sculpts. What you can see with the hair is that it's been completely simplified. Yeah, there's a little bit of complications here and there, but for the most part it's big, medium, small, and you can read what the hair is doing and where it is. It's simplification incarnate. Now, each of these areas, depending on the complexity, will also be divided into thirds as well. So again, instead of copying each strand, we are understanding the clumps of hair that make up the whole and expressing those. This exact method is used for beards, but instead of taking the entire beard and dividing that into thirds, I take each beard part, i.e. the moustache, goatee, chops, etc., and divide those into halves and or thirds. And yes, the same concept does work for long hair, afros, fur, etc. You just might need to add more sections depending on the complexity or the styling or grooming, etc. Third, and yeah, we're still on the theory part, your shapes need to be unique. In other words, not monotonous. Now, this means that you need to remember to use a big shape to establish the hair, medium shapes to style and break up the hair, and small shapes to add the illusion of realism and complexity. This rule is the boom, bang, and bing of pretty much all your designs, hair or otherwise. Check out this cool little setup that Ben Bolton has provided. He starts off with a general unique big shape. This isn't hair, by the way. Then he divides that into medium chunks, again not being monotonous, and finally he adds the smaller areas to really spruce things up. With hair it can look like this, 1, 2, 3, or like this, 1, 2, and 3, or even like this, 1, 2, and 3. Just follow this hierarchy and your hair, or anything really, will look awesome. Fourth, your lines need to be quick and confident. This means that you can't feather your lines like this. Hair is fluid and connected, not broken up and messy. Messy hair, by the way, still has flow to it, so yeah, you can't get away with that. And finally, the 5th thing to note, you can use the hair to exaggerate and express more gesture and movement. This step really adds life to the hair and can really give it that wow factor if done right. The danger here is that if you over detail the hair, you could end up with more of a mess, so again, keep it simple. And yeah, that's about it for the theory part, luckily. So just to recap, the hair is a separate mass influenced, or volume, influenced by the forms underneath, i.e. the head, and dividing the hair into simple to understand regions, especially thirds, is super helpful. Don't be monotonous with your hair shapes by using the big, medium, small, the boom, bang, and bing hierarchy, and use quick, confident lines when sculpting anything, not just the hair. Also, you can exaggerate the hair to get more movement and gesture. Alright, so now that we know all of this info, let's put that into practice with some really simple, quick and dirty ways to add hair on your model. Alright, and just a quick little run over here on how I do hair. So I'm just using the damp standard really quickly to get those big shapes in, and then of course the clay buildup. Or you can just see me building the form up. Obviously it's 3D, so you need to build forms up. You can't just have it on a flat area there. That was the primary form. Next, I'm going for the secondary forms here, again using the clay buildup, the dam standard, just to get those areas, kind of highlight those areas. Okay, here we've got the secondary forms, and I will add another one here, again using the clay buildup, just to build up the forms, and then using the dam standard just to kind of cut into and establish those forms a little bit better. And then here again with the clay buildup, or the dam standard rather, just pushing out those forms, and again with the clay buildup. So as you can see, I got the big forms in, then the medium forms or secondary forms, and now it's the tertiary forms. So being very methodical with the way I build up the hair. This again is kind of the mentality I'm using throughout hair in general, whether it's stylized, whether it's realistic, whether it's just kind of placing fur on a very realistic character, right? This is pretty much it. So yeah, not the best looking hair, but you can tell it's hair, so it gets the point across. So this is again the mentality that I go into every sculpt with, and that is pretty much what I'm going to be doing for this whole tutorial. So just keep this in mind and you'll be fine. And speaking of keeping things in mind, if you guys are eager for more tips and tricks to help build up your knowledge, don't forget about my new website and Discord channel, links down below. So the first thing I would do is get a general feeling for the hair by sculpting out a really basic block in, keyword basic. You can do this by creating a duplicate of the head with Ctrl+Shift+D and then masking it with Ctrl+Drag and then pressing Ctrl+Shift+E to create a nice clean cut. You can then delete the unneeded part and dynamesh it and then start to shape the hair into the simple blocked in shape that you want or need. I will also make sure to establish a basic hairline and hair path plus crown, as the hair will follow these areas. Remember that the hair isn't random, and these points or lines will help ground or guide our hair. This, by the way, is how I start all my hair sculpts, regardless of how simple or complicated it is going to end up being. Again, I'm making sure to start off big, then add some areas to separate the medium details, and then last I will add the smaller details. But now, as it's still the block-in, I won't add the smaller details just yet. Stylized hair. Alright, so a quick note on stylized hair. The same principles apply, only this time you really need to simplify the hair. Make sure to use the big, medium, and small hierarchy. If you ignore this hierarchy design, people will ignore your work. It's that simple. Here I will quickly build up the block-in, and then using quick, concise lines, I will build up the forms with the clay buildup, move, and dam standard brushes. I'm getting in the big forms first, separating them with medium forms, and then using small shapes and forms to add character and uniqueness to the strands and overall style. I'm keeping the overall big and medium shapes in mind, while also trying to keep the spacing and design dynamic. Given that we are starting with something simple, we can use the Chisel Organic Brush BCO to lay out some simple hair in an organized manner. After selecting the brush, you can press M, and this works with any insert mesh brush by the way, to bring up a menu and choose the different type of hairs. Remember the big, medium, small technique from earlier. The block out was the big, the fur itself is the medium, and the small in this case would be the pre-made hair separations from the brush itself. Alright, and as a quick little side note here, I just want to show you guys this really quickly. Just remember that under Dynamesh, you can find over here under Geometry and then Dynamesh, just make sure that the resolution is relatively high, that you have groups on. Okay, that's because I've got different groups here as well. And the active points, if I Dynamesh, that should be around 1 million. And yeah, around 1 million is just fine. So next I will press M and then select one of these brushes here, and I will lay this in. Now you'll notice that it is pretty intense, so I'll bring down the intensity. Okay, that's fine. And another problem you'll notice is that it kind of clips these areas. If I just want to do this area, it clips onto that area, which is what I don't want. So to counter that, what you can do is go on over to Brush, go all the way down to Auto Masking, and then you'll have this Mask by Polygroups. Turn this all the way up, and don't forget to turn this back down when you're done. Turn it all the way up, and then what you can do is, if I'm working on this, you'll notice it doesn't mess with this area. And if I'm working on this area, it doesn't mess with this area. That is very useful. Another thing I will do is I will go to Morph Target, which is over here. Okay, and then I will make sure to store the morph target. Now, storing the morph target means that it'll kind of work differently. So if I'm laying this, look at how that kind of works. If you don't want that to happen, just make sure to delete your morph target, and now you'll be able to lay it down normally. Okay, it won't do that little weird thing. But sometimes I'll work in conjunction with the morph target being stored or being deleted, so just keep that in mind. The reason as to why I want to store the morph target is if I do this. So if I do this, for example, if I drag that out and I don't want this area here, I can go to my morph brush, BMO or BMG I believe, and I can morph that out, okay? Okay, then I can store my morph target and then drag this out again, okay, and then, right, as you can see, I'm kind of laying it down, but of course I don't want this here all the time, so it kind of depends. So I can just morph that back out again, and it's a little bit of a hassle, but yeah, that's just kind of what I'm doing here. And sometimes I will work with it like this. What I'll do is I'll just smooth this back out so no one will really know that I'm doing that, and then quickly just lay these in really quickly here, right, something like that, just as a baseline, and then I'll just come back in with the clay buildup and the standard brushes just to kind of work it back in. But yeah, this is just a summary of what I'm doing, so around about that. So in case you're wondering, when I'm clicking all these things and doing all those things and going to my mask over here, that's the same thing. The auto masking is the same thing here under brush. Auto masking, it's the same thing here. Okay, so all of these here I just have on my menu here instead. So delete morph target, store morph target, it's all the same. Now of course I would almost never use this technique as it's pretty damn rudimentary, so unless you are really pressed for time, I really wouldn't recommend using just this method, but I am showing it because it can be useful when you need some ways to finish off or touch up areas. And yes, you can make your own brushes with custom hair to insert like these brushes. I'll show you how to do that later. By the way, just like with these chisel brushes, you can use alphas instead, and you can always download alphas online. There's plenty of hair brush alphas, so you can definitely check those out as well. They pretty much work the same as what I'm doing here. It's just that it's an actual alpha and not a chisel brush, kind of a difference there. Alright, so next up we have the curve brushes and IMMs. These are a little more practical and quite customizable, so let's use the standard brushes for now, and then we can also use some of the custom ones that I will make later. First things first, make sure to block out the hair like I showed previously, but the major difference here is that the block out needs to be slightly less bulky, as we will be adding quite a bit of mass and volume to it. So make sure that the block out isn't as voluminous as the reference you are using. Next, I will divide the hair into sections like I show on my references to make it easier to build up the hair. One thing to note here is that you can't make every section the same size and length. You need to vary it a bit as hair is organic, so you can't have it looking too monotonous. Remember the big, medium and small hierarchy. Now that that's sorted, let's select the curve strap snap BC, and after we have the brush selected, you can customize its properties. Right now it's a rectangular strip, but if we go to stroke, curve modifiers and click on size, we can select the size box over here, and then we can shape the curve the way we want. So as default, when I draw out the curve, you'll notice it starts out small and then ends big. That's because the shape specified is that way. So let's move them around to create a shape that makes sense. By the way, to add control points, just click within the box, and to delete points, just drag them into the canvas and let go. And dragging the point into the canvas and then back into the box will change the point from a Bezier curve to an angle, so just be wary of doing that. And also another quick tip, if you want to change the resolution of the curve, you can go to the curve and change the curve step to a higher or lower number. You can also change the divisions across the curve by going to brush, modifiers, and change this slider to increase or decrease the divisions. Yes, this is a separate menu to change a similar attribute. Oh, ZBrush, you got me again. And yeah, that's about it. All you need to do now is not go too crazy with the placement and grooming of the hair. So first I will lay in some of the bigger hair as a base, and then add some secondary shapes to break up and add character. After all this, you can use the dam standard and other brushes to quickly add details to the hair, but again, you need to keep it simple. Last, I will add some flyaway or flashy type hairs to really exaggerate the gesture and form of the hair. Alright, and another quick tip, if you don't know how the curve brushes work, they have a few functions, so this is just a quick tip on that. Once you draw out the curve, you will see a dashed line, and this works for any curve brush by the way. As long as you don't click away from the line or draw another curve, this line will stay here, the dashed line, this line will stay here for you to customize the curve. You can change the size of the brush and click on the curve to update the size, and you can also change all the curve attributes I mentioned before, and then click on it to update it again. Now there's also the cyan cursor. This appears when you actually hover over the dashed line, and this is simply used to move the curve without distorting it, unlike the move brush. The cyan and red cursor, by the way, work independent of one another. So this means if you have one size for the red cursor, you can have another size for the cyan cursor. You can also go to the curve menu and lock the start or end of a curve so it doesn't move while you are trying to move it or groom it with a cyan cursor. Another tip, if you don't want the brush to snap, just go on over to curve, switch snap off. Then super important, because ZBrush go to Picker Depth and select Once Z. This will make sure that you'll no longer snap to your surface. Remember that you need to change these settings back again if you want snap enabled. Right, and as a quick bonus, let's make our own IMM curve brush. So first we'll select any tool and make sure to insert one first, and then go down to initialize. By the way, if these settings do not look the same as mine, just make sure to go down to insert or up to insert and then insert another tool. You can then change the settings over here to 1x, 3y, and 1z. Then click on Q cube. This will make a cube with 1 block width, 1 block length, and 3 blocks high. That's the point of this. So after that, I will change it into something I feel makes more sense for my liking. Next, I'm going to make sure to color 3 separate polygroups, Ctrl W like this. This, by the way, is very important for it to function as a proper curve brush. After that, let's rename this to Simple and then duplicate it to create one with some divisions. I'll press BZM to get the Z modeler. This by default will have the insert edge loop. I'll insert one near the end and then another one off the center. I'll add 2 supporting lines, and the closer these lines are, the more pinched it'll be, so you might want to spread this out a little bit further. Then using the mask to mask the center lines and then pressing W to scale it down a bit. These grooves will look like separate hair bunches later. I'll do the same to create an inflated middle piece. After that, again, make sure you have 3 separate divisions for your polygroups. They need to be 3 separate polygroups, not 4 or 5. Just make sure you check all around. This is important again. After that, you can press B for brush and then select Create Insert Mesh. Select New and then go to Stroke and set Curve and Snap on. After that, make sure that Weld Points is on under Brush Modifiers, and now finally you have a custom curve brush. Luckily, you can copy the size settings for the curve and paste them on your new brush, and this is the result. Now to further add to this brush, press D for dynamic, and you can go to crease settings and add some sharpness to your curves. By the way, you should do this to the IMMs before making them IMMs. And another thing you can do is add more options to this brush by going to the other IMMs you created and then adding them to this brush. Just make sure you have the brush selected, go to the one you want to add and then press B and then create IMM, and instead of selecting new, you can select add. Now you will have multiple strands that you can use right here. You can then press B and then save as to actually save this brush. Realistic hair. Alright, so time to put on our big boy pants and get to actually sculpting the hair without any fancy tricks. Raw sculpting the hair, by the way, is really time consuming, and unless you either have too much time on your hands or are doing it for practice, I would recommend not raw sculpting every hair in general, by using it in conjunction with the other tools and techniques I've shown. I still believe that raw sculpting has the most appeal and glamour, but not everyone will have enough time to do it, so just keep that in mind. Anyway, just like the other techniques, I will start with a basic blocking of the hair. After that, I will establish the big and medium shapes with the clay, move, and damp standard brushes. This is one of the most important parts as it dictates where your sculpt will go from here. So just to make sure, I will take some screenshots of my sculpt and take it into Photoshop to make sure I'm not going too crazy or keeping things too monotonous. Here you can see I get a little stuck, but after a quick draw over, I'm able to establish some confident strands and lines. I'm also making plenty use of the reference as well, so don't forget about that. On the sculpt, you can clearly see the bigger shapes, the medium divisions, and the smaller details. Another thing that will really make your hair pop is adding twists to your hair sculpts. In Leo's case, his hair is pretty curled, so I already had that covered, but with De Niro, I purposely added these twists to give the hair a little bit more character. Now again, don't go too crazy, try to twist and vary the hair while using a reference to help guide you on this. And if you really want the hyper real look, you can add some keyword some curves with the curve brushes like I've shown before. This will really make the hair pop. Another thing you can do is take any brush, go to modifiers and change the alpha repetitions here to get some really detailed strokes from them as you draw your hair. Beards. Beards are pretty much the same as normal hair, but in this case I treat each beard part separately, the moustache, goatee, chops, etc. I also use the Mask Project BMO to quickly draw out the forms. The Mask Project is a mask brush that pops separate forms out after you draw them. The Z intensity, by the way, controls how thick the projection will be, so don't forget to hold on Control, then change the intensity because this is a mask brush after all. And just like all the techniques before, I will establish the big shapes, divide that into medium parts, and then use the smaller details to breathe life and exaggerate the gesture. And that's it. Again, if you want extra details, you can use the curves and modified alphas, but I usually don't do this with sculpted hair as it can get a bit distracting, so just be wary of that. And yeah, that's about it. So as you can see, I don't just use one method for my actual sculpts. I usually use a combination of alphas, raw sculpting, and IMMs to achieve realistic types of hair, while also keeping the big, medium, and small hierarchy in mind. Now, a few of these methods I showed were a bit rushed, which is why the hair looks kinda trash, but if you just put in the time and keep the rules I laid out in mind, your hair sculpts will improve. Hair requires both knowledge and lots of patience. Homework. Yep, if you really want to improve, watching a bunch of videos will only take you so far. So in order to actually learn, you need to practice. So for your homework, I want you guys to practice blocking out the hair, just blocking it out. That means no detailing around 10 times. So you're gonna block these out 10 times. I would recommend either taking pictures of yourself or your family members and friends for convenience, but if you don't have more than 5 friends to use, you can always use celebrity pictures instead. And once you have the pictures, try taking them into Photoshop to divide the hair like I showed to make it easier to sculpt later. Now after doing this, I want you to try out the hair demo I showed around 5 times. So start with the big form, divide that into medium forms, and then finally get the tertiary details in. Now for this you can only use 3 brushes, so I want you to use 1 clay brush of your choice. I personally use the clay buildup. 2, you can use the damp standard brush to dig in and pull forms out, and 3, you can use the smooth brush, which is technically unnecessary, but I did use it in the demo, so yeah, you can use it as well. But that's it, only 3 brushes. And finally, after you've done this, you can pick 3 of the blockouts you did and try to use either the raw sculpting, IMM, or chisel brush techniques I showed to build up and design the hair. Try to use one dominant method for the hair as opposed to haphazard mixture of techniques. This way you will have one proper way of completing the hair. And one last thing on the references, make sure you gather enough refs to use. You can't just take 2 pictures and call it a day, as this is 3D, so you will need quite a few pictures. Also, make sure to have proper lighting in the pictures. In other words, you need a good visibility of light and shadows to really interpret the forms properly. And yeah, that's it for this one, so like it if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, let me know what you guys thought in the comment section, check out my new website, and of course, I will see you in the next one.